My name is Emily Carter. I'm 29, and Christmas dinners in my family have always been less about warmth and more about theater. The house glitters, the table shines, and every smile hides a blade. The turkey is roasted golden, the cranberry sauce gleams, and the jokes are sharp enough to slice through skin. From the outside, the Thompsons look like perfection. Twinkling lights curl around the porch railings. A tree tall enough to brush the ceiling beams sparkles in the bay window. Guests call it magical. But I know better. The magic is for show. Behind it, cracks spread like hairline fractures in fine china. You can ignore them until they cut your finger. Inside the dining room, everything is staged. Mahogany polished to a mirror. Silverware aligned like soldiers. Crystal glasses so thin they could break from a sigh. The chandelier overhead casts everyone in gold as if money itself was pouring down on us. It isn't for us. It's for the neighbors, for Dad's colleagues, for anyone who needs reminding that the Thompsons still sit higher than most. I cut into my roast quietly, eyes lowered when Marcus leaned back in his chair. My older brother has always known how to command a room. Tonight he made sure his cufflinks caught the light before he spoke. Working so hard yet still poor. Classic Emily. Laughter rolled down the table like a cue had been given. It wasn't spontaneous. It was practiced, the kind of laughter that doesn't come from humor but from habit. Dad joined in, smoothly swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His reflection gleamed back at him in the cut crystal as he delivered his line. Even a lifetime of work won't buy you a house. Some people just don't have the head for real success. The sting burned, but I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing it. I smiled, instead, a small curve of my lips that looked like surrender. If they thought I was defeated, they'd move on. Sometimes silence is the safest armor. Marcus wasn't finished. He lifted his glass in mock celebration, his grin wide. "Some of us climb corporate ladders," he said. His eyes darted to me, sharp as broken glass. "Some of us still can't afford real furniture." A chuckle circled the table. Aunt Caroline, usually silent, even let one slip. I dragged my fork through the cranberry sauce, streaking red across porcelain like paint. It was the same play every year. Marcus sets the line, Dad approves, the rest follow. But then a voice cut through the script, unexpectedly. "Isn't success measured in more ways than money, Rachel? My cousin, younger than me, is home from grad school in California." Her tone was soft, almost tentative, but it stopped forks midair. Marcus barked a laugh. "Only people without money say that." Dad nodded as if sealing the verdict. "Exactly. Philosophy doesn't pay bills. Neither does whatever Emily's doing these days." My name lingered heavy sour. Rachel's eyes flicked toward me, apologetic but searching. She didn't know the story, not all of it, but she knew enough to recognize cruelty. Marcus leaned forward. His grin sharpened. "You're awfully quiet tonight." "What's wrong, Emily?" "Run out of excuses." I raised my glass, let the ruby wine brush my lips, and set it down with deliberate calm. Then I looked at him. Straight on. "Just listening," I said. 2 words, that was all. But they landed heavier than he expected. For the first time all night, Marcus shifted in his chair. Just slightly. Because I wasn't just listening. I was storing. Every insult, every laugh, every sideways glance that told me I didn't belong. The conversation restarted, relieved to slide back into familiar rhythm. Marcus launched into a story about his firm. Dad nodded proudly. Mom fussed with her napkin. But at my side, Rachel leaned closer, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't let them get to you. They'll regret it one day." I smiled again, but not the polite, plastered smile I'd perfected all my life. This one was sharper, because she was right. They would regret it. And Christmas dinner was only the beginning. At Christmas dinner, Marcus and Dad mocked me like it was tradition. Poor broke, never going to own a house. Their words sounded new to Rachel, maybe even shocking. But to me, they were echoes, familiar lines that stretched back years to the very walls of the house we grew up in. People think rivalry begins when careers start, when choices diverge. For me, it started in childhood. 2 kids under the same roof, but treated as if we lived in different universes. Marcus, the golden sun, and me, the quiet reminder of what not to become. Our staircase wall was a museum of Marcus's success. His report cards, framed in polished wood, his basketball photos lined up like trophies. Guests would pause, nod, congratulate my parents on raising such a fine young man. My own report cards, folded tucked away in a drawer. Out of sight, out of mind. When I was 12, I won a statewide art contest. My drawing hung in a gallery downtown. I remember clutching the ticket stub, running home with cheeks warm from pride. Mom glanced, smiled politely, and said, "That's nice, Emily. Maybe next year you'll do something practical." Practical. That word shadowed me for years like a leash no one admitted was there. Marcus never needed to chase recognition, it arrived on a platter. At 16, he made varsity basketball. Dad invited neighbors to watch, cheering, as if Marcus had already made it to the NBA. When he scored high on his SATs, champagne flowed in the kitchen. He was tall, confident, already rehearsing for the role of heir. I wanted something different. At 14, I taught myself coding on a hand-me-down computer. I built a rough 3D model of our house down to the kitchen counter and backyard swing. I pulled Dad into the room, proud. "Look, it's our house." He leaned in, briefly muttered, "Cute. But computers are for games, Emily. You'll never pay bills with that nonsense," and shut the door. The glow of the screen stayed bright. My pride cooled into something harder. Dinner conversations always drew the same lines. Dad asked Marcus about his professor's internships, business clubs. Mom rehearsed introductions for his future colleagues. When I tried to share an app prototype, a new program I'd built, they nodded politely before cutting me off with the same phrase Emily's still finding herself. "She'll land somewhere stable eventually." Stable. That word didn't comfort me. It pinned me down. But not everyone dismissed me. Mrs. Reynolds, my art teacher, noticed how my sketches weren't just pictures but systems. She told me, "You think in patterns, Emily. Don't let anyone tell you that doesn't matter." Her encouragement lit something inside me, something my family had never seen. And then there was Jake, the boy next door. He wasn't my best friend, but he was the first peer who believed. While Marcus practiced free throws, Jake sat cross-legged beside me on the floor. I showed him a VR sketch of a fantasy park I'd designed. He slipped on the headset, looked around, and grinned. "This feels like the future, Em. Don't stop." His words stuck longer than my father's dismissals, even if I never admitted it. Still at home, those voices were drowned out by louder ones. I remember being 16, sketchbook in hand, when I overheard Mom on the phone. "Emily's creative, but Marcus will carry the Thompson name forward." I froze in the hallway, her words tightening around my chest. That was the moment I understood my role had already been written. Marcus was the rising sun. I was the fading background. Senior year widened the divide. Marcus opened his Harvard acceptance letter in the living room. Dad popped champagne. Mom wept with joy. Relatives called to congratulate. The house pulsed with pride. That same week, I received my own letter, an internship offer from a small tech incubator in virtual reality. My hands shook as I showed it to Dad. "They think I could really contribute." He barely glanced. Virtual reality. "Emily, stop chasing fads. Apply to business school like your brother. That's what real success looks like." His tone was final. No champagne. No applause. Just silence. But I didn't throw the letter away. I folded it neatly and slipped it into my journal. Proof. Proof that someone out there believed in me. That I wasn't invisible everywhere. Years later at family dinners, the script stayed the same. Marcus boasted about contracts, promotions, houses. The table lit up with applause. Then my eyes turned to me. Someone would tilt their head and ask, "So, still doing your little hobby?" The laughter was polite but sharp. I always nodded, smiled faintly, and let them think I was small. But I carried those remarks like stones in my pocket. Heavy, yes, but useful. Mrs. Reynolds' encouragement stayed with me. Jake's awe stayed with me. Their voices, though quiet, kept me standing. Looking back, I realized the favoritism wasn't just about Marcus being the golden child. It was about me being the daughter. In our family, sons built legacies. Daughters kept peace. They had written my ending before I even started. But what they didn't know was this: every slight became fuel. Every dismissal hardened into resolve. While they polished Marcus's halo, I was building wings of my own. And one day those wings would take me higher than they ever imagined. At Christmas I smiled, while Marcus and Dad mocked me same as always. They thought I was fragile, that I'd bend under their words. But what they didn't know was that the turning point had happened years earlier at another dinner when I was 22. The table that night smelled of roast chicken and Chardonnay. Dad was bragging about Marcus again, his internship at Goldman Sachs, his professors at Harvard, his guaranteed future. Mom sat glowing, her pearls catching the chandelier light. Pride radiated across the room like stage lights. When the silence settled, I found my chance. My palms were sweaty, my throat tight, but I spoke anyway. "I'm not applying to business school," I said. "I'm starting my own company, in VR design." The room broke. Dad's fork hit his plate with a clang. "You're joking," he snapped. "I'm not. I've been working on prototypes." Marcus leaned back, a smirk painted across his face. "So you're betting your whole life on video games?" "It's not a game," I fired back. "It's an immersive design. Virtual space is enough." Dad's hand slammed against the table. The crystal rattled. "Do you know how humiliating this sounds? Your brother's at Harvard. Your cousins are in law and medicine. And you," his finger jabbed the air toward me, "you want to play with toys?" Mom reached for my hand, her voice softer but sharper than his anger. "Sweetheart, you're embarrassing yourself. People will think we failed as parents." Embarrassing. That word lodged deep, heavier than all their laughter combined. By dessert, the verdict was delivered. Dad's voice was flat. "If you walk away from business school, you walk away from our support. No tuition, no allowance, no safety net. You're on your own." Marcus grinned, satisfied. "Good luck paying rent with your little art projects." I wanted to scream, to throw every sketch and prototype across the table, but my voice came out low, steady. "Fine, I'll do it alone." That night I packed 2 suitcases, a box of sketchbooks, my battered laptop, and the keys to the Honda Civic Marcus loved to mock. By morning I was gone. My new home was a shoebox apartment in Tempe. Cracked walls, a mattress on the floor, roaches scattering when the lights flicked on. Clothes stayed in suitcases because I had no dresser. The Civic sagged in the lot, coughing every time it started. From the outside, I looked like a failure. Maybe that's what my family wanted to imagine me, suffering proof that cutting me off was the right choice. But inside that apartment, another story began. At night, with neighbors arguing through thin walls, I opened my laptop. I coded, I sketched, I posted on forums. Most people ignored me. Some laughed. Even a friend at a tech meetup shook his head. "Emily, play it safe. Freelance. Don't gamble everything on this." I didn't argue. I just kept working. One night, fueled by cheap coffee, I uploaded my first digital environment, a simple interactive gallery, to an online marketplace. I closed my laptop expecting nothing. The next morning, a notification pinged. Someone somewhere had bought it. $600. I stared until the numbers blurred. 600. To anyone else, pocket change. To me, oxygen. Proof I wasn't crazy. Proof that the dream had weight, even if my family never saw it. I leaned back in my chair, sunlight slipping through cracked blinds, and for the first time since leaving home, I let myself breathe. My family pictured me eating ramen, drowning in bills, regretting every choice. Maybe that gave them comfort. But in that dingy apartment, under the hum of a flickering desk lamp, I had taken my first real step, and I promised myself something, then I'd keep it quiet. Let them believe I was broke, lost, struggling. Because when the truth finally surfaced, when the numbers grew too big to hide, their laughter would die in their throats. And the silence that followed would be mine. After my father cut me off, and Marcus sneered about my little art projects, I moved into that shoebox apartment with nothing but 2 suitcases, a mattress on the floor, and a Civic that coughed smoke every time it started. To my family, I was finished. To them, I was the cautionary tale proof that chasing dreams meant falling flat. But the truth, that $600 sale I made in the dead of night was only the beginning. If you'd walked past my window back then, 2 in the morning, you'd see nothing more than a tired 20-something hunched over a laptop. But inside, I was building. Worlds, ideas, futures, no one else could imagine. Pizza boxes stacked in the corner. Coffee cups lined up like trophies. My laptop wheezing its fans, screaming like it was about to explode. Outside, sirens wailed and neighbors argued. Inside, I kept coding, sketching, testing prototypes no one had asked for. 6 months later, I scraped together $50 and signed up for a local startup fair in Phoenix. That was my shot. My entire budget bought me a folding table, a flimsy banner from a copy shop, and the right to stand among polished booths with investors strolling by. I put on my one decent blazer from a thrift store and set up my beat-up laptop. The demo was glitchy, the resolution fuzzy, but it was mine. The first investor leaned in, headset barely covering his hair gel. Within 10 seconds, he chuckled. "This looks like a toy, not a business." He didn't even take my card. Another man crossed his arms, tried the headset, lasted 30 seconds, then pulled it off with a laugh. "VR art, nobody's paying real money for fake paintings." He tossed my flyer back at me like it was trash. I smiled politely, but inside I burned. By noon, my booth had gone invisible. Investors streamed past eyes, pulled to shinier banners, slicker pitches. Even Jake, an old friend who had agreed to help, was losing faith. "Emily," he whispered, "maybe they're right. Maybe it's too niche. You're smart. You could still get an MBA, join a real company." His words cut not because he meant harm, but because for a second I almost believed him. What if Dad had been right? What if this was just a phase? Then just after lunch she appeared. A woman in her 50s, neat blazer, sensible shoes. Quiet confidence that filled the space more than the investor's swagger ever could. Without a word, she put on the headset. She walked slowly through my gallery, an immersive space of sculptures and surreal landscapes. She lingered, head-tilting, eyes narrowing, as though she could see something no one else had seen. When she finally pulled off the headset, her eyes shone. "How much?" she asked. I blinked. "Excuse me, I want to buy this whole collection. Name your price." Jake froze, his mouth hanging open. My throat went dry. I had prepared a dozen pitches, none for this moment. Somehow I managed to stammer a number that felt impossibly bold, $220,000. She didn't flinch. She nodded. "Send me the paperwork." By the end of that afternoon, the contract was signed. Just like that, my work was no longer theory. It was business. Jake stared at me as though I'd pulled off a miracle. "You actually sold it," I laughed, shaky adrenaline buzzing in my veins. "Looks like I did." But that night, driving home in my sputtering Civic, I didn't call my parents. I didn't text Marcus. To them, I was still the broke daughter wasting time. And I wanted to keep it that way. Because the longer they underestimated me, the sweeter the reveal would be. 1 deal turned into 3, 3 into 10. Within 2 years, I had contracts worth millions. Still, I kept the same Civic, the same apartment, the same thrift store jeans. At family dinners, I let them pay for meals, let them believe I was a failure. It was a mask I wore so well they never thought to question it. But back in that cramped apartment, the numbers on my screen told a different story. I was climbing, quietly, steadily, and one day the mask would come off. When it did, they wouldn't just see me succeed. They'd realize I had been winning all along right under their noses. Every visit home followed the same script. Polished cars in the driveway, crystal glasses clinking in the dining room. Marcus at the center, as if the table was his stage. My parents kept the spotlight on him, proud of their heir. He strutted in with a briefcase like a trophy tie, perfectly knotted confidence spilling over before he even sat down. That night, he was already mid-performance when I walked in. "We just closed the biggest deal of the quarter," Marcus announced, sliding his phone across the table so everyone could admire the glowing charts. 9 figures. The firm couldn't have done it without me. Applause. Genuine applause. My father patted him so hard his cufflinks rattled. My mother's eyes glistened like she'd birthed a legend. Aunts and uncles leaned closer, whispering admiration. I slipped quietly into my chair. No one noticed. No one asked. When the excitement died down, Aunt Caroline turned to me. She tilted her head, her voice honeyed. "So, still doing your little hobby, Emily?" My fork stopped midair. Hobby. That word always landed like a stone. I forced a small smile. "It's not just a hobby. I've been building virtual environments working with design systems," Marcus cut in with a laugh. "Virtual reality again. You're still chasing that. Honestly, Em, at this point, it's just cute." Laughter circled the table. Uncle David shook his head, lifting his glass. "Creative spirit, that one. But you can't pay bills with creativity." I pressed the napkin into my lap until the fabric wrinkled. They had no idea. Not one of them had come to my showcases. Not one had clicked the links I sent when tech blogs featured my work. Once, when my startup pitched at a local conference, I asked Mom if she'd come. She smiled gently. "Those things aren't my scene, sweetheart. But Marcus has a big presentation next week. Maybe we can all go to that." And they did. The entire family filled the auditorium cheering like he had just discovered fire. I watched the recording online later, counting familiar faces. Every single one of them. For me, not a single chair was filled. The memory burned now as Marcus poured himself more wine, grinning wide. "One day you'll get serious, Emily. Find something real. Until then, we'll keep cheering you on." He winked. "Everyone needs a hobby." My cheeks heated not with shame, but with something steadier. I wanted to tell them about the contract I had signed that week, one worth more than Marcus's bonus. I wanted to throw it in their faces, but I didn't. Instead, I traced the rim of my plate with my fork, calm and deliberate. Because silence wasn't surrendered. It was storage. Later that night, back in my apartment, I sat at my desk. Contracts sprawled across the table, numbers glowing on the screen. The city outside was quiet. Inside, I was alive, fingers flying across the keyboard. Marcus's laughter echoed in my head. Aunt Caroline's syrupy question. Uncle David's smug dismissal. Mom's polite refusal. Each word replayed, each one a wound. And wounds, if you're careful, can harden into armor. I leaned back, rubbing tired eyes, and whispered to the empty room. "One day you'll regret this. Because they wouldn't just see me succeed. They'd regret not standing beside me when they had the chance. For now, I let them believe I was small, struggling, unimportant. But I was sharpening something they couldn't see. And the next time they looked across that polished dining table, my silence would cut sharper than any laugh they'd ever thrown at me. From the outside, I was still the same Emily. The Civic parked crooked in the lot, coughing smoke every morning. The cracked apartment walls that smelled faintly of mildew when it rained. My groceries packed into bags that looked like they'd been through a war. Anyone passing by would shake their head and think, "Poor girl, she never figured life out." And I let them. I gave them the image they wanted, a failure they could use as gossip over wine and backyard barbecues. It was easier that way. Their assumptions were the perfect disguise. But here's what they didn't see. One afternoon, I sat in a cramped conference room in San Francisco, my second-hand blazer clinging to my back with sweat. The table was covered in papers, laptops, coffee cups, half-drained. Across from me sat 3 men in polished suits, their pens clicking against notepads. They looked at me like I was a puzzle they weren't sure was worth solving. The contract lay between us, 7 figures on the line. My hand trembled as I slid the final page across. The lead investor leaned back, studied me for a long moment, then scrawled his name in neat, deliberate strokes. Just like that, the deal was done. I shook his hand, mine clammy but steady. Inside, adrenaline rushed like fire through my veins. Outside, I was calm, nodding, thanking them for their time. They had no idea that 2 hours earlier I'd been eating cold noodles at my desk, praying the Civic wouldn't stall on the drive over. That contract bought me more than money. It bought me silence, the ability to keep living small on the outside while quietly building something unstoppable on the inside. But there were close calls. One summer, Mom invited me to a family brunch. Marcus had just closed on his second house, and the gathering was an excuse to parade it. I showed up in faded jeans, hair tied back, carrying a modest bottle of wine I'd picked up at the corner store. They barely noticed me until Dad's friend, a finance consultant, cornered me at the buffet. "I think I saw your name in a tech newsletter," he said casually, spooning eggs onto his plate. "Something about VR platforms that you—" My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced a laugh. Must be someone else. Lots of Emilys out there. He frowned, searching my face, then shrugged and turned away. I exhaled slowly. Hands clenched so tight around my plate, I almost cracked the china. That night back in my apartment, I replayed the moment again and again. How close it had been. How a single slip could have shattered the disguise. But part of me is thrilled at it. The secret was growing too big to contain, and some reckless corner of my soul wanted them to find out. Just not yet. Then came the email. It was past midnight, my laptop balanced on the wobbly desk I'd bought from Goodwill. The screen glowed against the dark room coffee cups stacked like a skyline around me. I was scrolling through project updates when the notification pinged. Subject, "Congratulations, Emily." I clicked, half expecting spam. But there it was. Forbes. "You've been selected for 30 under 30. I read the words once, twice, 3 times. My hands shook so badly, I had to grip the edge of the desk. My name, in black and white, attached to the kind of recognition people built whole careers chasing. For a long moment, I just sat there staring at the screen. Then I did something that might sound strange. I pressed delete, because recognition wasn't the goal. Not yet. I wanted the reveal to come on my terms, not through a magazine blurb. Still, after I hit delete, I sat back and let the weight of it settle. Proof. The world was beginning to notice. Meanwhile, my family stayed blind. At Christmas, I parked the Civic outside Marcus's mansion. He smirked at the dents as he adjusted his cufflinks. Mom tutted at my shoes. Dad sighed when I offered to bring store-brand dessert. They thought I was clinging to scraps, surviving on hand-me-downs and pity. But behind closed doors, the story was different. When neighbors whispered, "She's broke," I was negotiating a deal in London. When old classmates bragged about promotions, I was signing an acquisition contract that would ripple across Europe. And when Claire, an old high school rival, mocked my Civic in the grocery store parking lot, she had no idea her paycheck depended on the very company I owned. Every insult, every dismissive glance became fuel. The more they doubted, the more powerful my silence grew. But secrets have a way of slipping loose. It started with whispers in tech circles, blog posts speculating about the mysterious founder behind a billion-dollar design platform, investors mentioning my name during interviews. Each time my pulse quickened. Each time I wondered how long until the rumor reached the wrong ears. I thought I had more time. I was wrong. One evening, my father's colleague forwarded him a link. The subject line was simple. "Is this your daughter?" Emily, the headline read. Forbes, America's youngest billionaire, has been living in plain sight. The lie I had carried for years cracked open in a single subject line. And instead of fear, I felt a strange calm. For the first time, I was ready. Christmas Eve in my family was never quiet. The chandeliers glowed the dining table, stretched long and shining, and laughter filled every corner. From the outside, it looked like a celebration. From the inside, it felt like a stage one where I always played the same role. Marcus sat at the center like he owned the spotlight. His Rolex caught the light every time he moved, his voice booming just a little louder than necessary. He didn't talk so much as perform. "Hard work pays off," he said, sparing a piece of turkey. Of course not for everyone. Eyes slid toward me. A chuckle rolled around the table. I kept cutting my food slow and steady. My fork scraped the plate just enough to drown out their noise in my own ears. Cousin Sarah leaned forward. her pearls swinging slightly as she smirked. Emily didn't. You say you were freelancing? That must be unpredictable. Her tone dripped with mock sympathy, the kind that wasn't meant to comfort but to wound politely. Before I could reply, Dad chimed in, his glass raised halfway. Unpredictable doesn't pay bills. That's why stability matters. If you'd followed Marcus's path, you wouldn't be treading water. The room hummed with agreement. Aunts nodded, Wazens smiled knowingly, like my father's word was gospel. Mom reached across for her wine. Her voice was soft practiced, and yet it cut deeper than the sharpest laugh. We just want you settled, sweetheart. By now you should have something steady, not still chasing ideas. Ideas. She made the word sound like a curse. For a moment I felt the familiar burn in my chest, but I swallowed it. I had learned long ago that silence was sharper than argument. Of course, I murmured. My voice was calm, almost disinterested. Sarah's eyes glittered. We only say these things because we care. It's just hard to watch you stall. That word stall landed like a slap. Marcus lifted his glass high. To my family, he said, and to make the right choices. The clinking of crystals followed. Laughter rose again. My glass stayed on the table untouched. But I wasn't the only one watching. At the far end, Rachel, my younger cousin, home from California, shifted in her chair. She'd been quiet all night, but her gaze flicked between me and Marcus. She chewed her lip, then finally spoke. Not everyone measures success the same way, she said softly. The room froze for a second, forks midair. Marcus let out a laugh that was all performance. That's what people say when they can't make it. Dad chuckled, nodding. Exactly. Philosophy is nice, but it doesn't build futures. Rachel shrank back, her cheeks red. I caught her eye, gave her a faint smile. It was the first honest thing anyone had said all night. Conversation shifted again back to Marcus. His bonuses, his latest car, the vacation he was planning in Italy. Each word layered over me like bricks. But then Uncle Peter, who had drunk more wine than he should, joined in. Emily. You still driving that old car? He asked loudly. Saw one like it broken down on the highway last week. Thought of you. Laughter burst raw and unchecked this time. My hand tightened around my fork, but I forced my expression still. Calm, detached. Heather, my cousin, who loved to follow Marcus's lead, smirked. You should let Marcus pick out your next car. Maybe then you'll arrive on time in style. Her words slid through the room like knives, but I didn't flinch. I simply adjusted my napkin, slow and deliberate, because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my company had just closed an international deal that very morning. The wire confirmation was still fresh in my inbox, more zeros than they could imagine. I could have thrown it at them right then. Could have flipped the table of mockery with a single truth. But not yet. Timing was everything. As the laughter died down, I slipped my phone from my pocket, careful beneath the tablecloth. One buzz. One new email notification glowing against the screen. Subject Forbes, confirmation of publication. Embargo lifts December 26, 6:00 a.m. Estant. The faintest smile tugged at my lips. They thought tonight was about piling on until I cracked. They thought their jokes were sharp enough to break me. But I wasn't breaking. I was waiting. Counting down. 48 hours. That was all. In 2 days, the world and this very table would know exactly who I was. And once the truth surfaced, there would be no going back. The dining room glowed with gold light, the chandelier spilling warmth across polished silver and crystal. The smell of turkey butter and cinnamon filled the air. But beneath it all, the mood had turned sharp. Laughter rippled down the table. Not kind laughter, but the kind that fed on someone else's silence. My silence. I sat still. Fork poised, smile faint. Every time I let a comment pass, the room grew bolder. My quiet had become a game, and they were winning round after round. I reached for my glass of water, the stem cool between my fingers. That was when Heather pounced. Heather had always loved the sound of her own voice. She leaned forward now, her perfume cloying her lipstick, leaving a red crescent on the rim of her glass. Her earrings sparkled as she tilted her head. a smile too wide, too sharp. "So tell me, Emily," she said, her voice pitched to carry, "how can you even afford to be here tonight? Do you need someone to spot you for the bill?" The words cut the air clean in two. For a heartbeat, the room froze. Forks hovered, glasses still. Then came the laughter, soft at first, rippling like a current. Marcus was the first to let it out, chuckling, shaking his head as if Heather had just spoken the obvious truth. Dad smirked, that familiar smug curve of his lips he wore when he thought a point had been proven without argument. Mom sighed, long and dramatic, her tone heavy with theatrical disappointment, and then it spread. Uncles, aunts, cousins, one by one, they joined in until the sound was unified, a chorus of pity disguised as amusement. Heather twirled her wineglass earrings, catching the light like tiny blades. "I mean, with the way you've been living," she added, voice honeyed and cruel. "We just don't want you overextending yourself." "Right, Marcus." Marcus leaned back, smirk, never faltering. "She's always been resourceful. I'm sure she'll scrape by somehow." The laughter came louder this time, less restrained. I let my eyes move around the table, face by face. Sarah, who used to whisper secrets with me during sleepovers, silent. Aunt Caroline, who once told me I had so much potential, silent. Not a single voice rose in my defense. I was alone, cornered, cast as the broke cousin who should be grateful just to sit at their table. But the heat in my neck wasn't shameful. It was resolved. I placed my glass down carefully, fingers steady as I folded my napkin on my lap. Let them think they'd broken me. Let Heather revel in her petty triumph. They thought this was the punchline. The waiter appeared, then moving gracefully between chairs, a tray of champagne flutes balanced effortlessly in one hand. He set a glass before Heather, then Marcus, then paused at me. His gaze held mine, a fraction too long, eyes flicking with recognition. "Refill," he asked, voice polite, but there was something behind it, something that made my pulse quicken. I nodded once, measured. The fizz of champagne bubbled into my glass, the sound barely audible over the hum of laughter. Heather leaned back, satisfied. Marcus lifted his glass, smug as ever. Dad tapped the table like a gavel, closing their mock trial with silent approval. To them, the case was closed. I was guilty of being less. Always less. But the waiter lingered. He leaned slightly closer as he set the bottle down, his words meant only for me. "Congratulations, Miss Carter," he whispered. The Forbes article went live early. For a split second, my breath caught. Not from shock, the timing, the precision of it. The universe is handing me a spark in the middle of their darkness. I looked down at the golden fizz rising in my glass, then back at the faces around me. They were laughing, still blind to the ground shifting under their feet. And slowly, deliberately, I smiled. A smile Heather didn't understand. A smile Marcus couldn't mock. I raised my glass, finally joining their toast, though not for the reason they thought. They believed they had destroyed me, reduced me to nothing. They thought Heather had won the night. But none of them knew the truth. Not yet. And by the time dessert reached the table, the whole world would know exactly who the real joke was. The echoes of Heather's laughter still clung to the air, sharp and lingering, even after the room had moved on to their side conversations. My hand rested calmly on the stem of my glass, steady, unshaken. They thought they had finished me. They thought I was cornered and humiliated. But they didn't know the ground beneath their feet was already shifting. The sudden vibration against polished mahogany cut through the chatter like a blade. A phone buzzing on the table. Marcus's phone. The vibration was loud, insistent rattling against the fine wood as though it demanded attention. Marcus glanced at the screen and straightened. His shoulders squared, his smug grin fading into something far more controlled. "It's my boss," he announced, his voice suddenly clipped and professional. He rose slightly in his chair, hitting the answer button with the speed of a man eager to impress. "Yes, sir," Marcus said brightly. "Merry Christmas." "Of course, thank you. Same to you and your family." At first it sounded like routine chatter, the same polished tone he used when talking to anyone above him in rank. But then something changed. His face, usually so composed, drained of its color. His eyes flicked to me quickly, nervously. "Yes. My sister. he repeated, his voice cracking on the word. The table was still. Forks hovered above plates. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. It was as if everyone at once had sensed the shift, and then faint but clear the voice on the other end carried across the table. Is your sister really Forbes's youngest billionaire? The words landed heavier than any insult I'd endured all evening. Marcus froze, his jaw slack, his mouth hanging open like he'd just swallowed glass. He tried to form words, but nothing came. His boss chuckled, the sound leaking from the speaker, unbothered and confident. It's all over the news, the man continued. Forbes just broke the story. Emily Carter. Quiet under the radar. Brilliant tech founder. My entire board's buzzing about it. Congratulations to your family, Marcus. You must be proud. Marcus's hand trembled around the phone. His knuckles whitened as though the device might slip through his fingers. Yes, sir, he stammered. Thank you, sir. I'll pass it along. His thumb jabbed at the screen, ending the call too quickly, too desperately. The silence afterward was suffocating. No one laughed. No one spoke. It was as though the chandelier above had frozen mid-sparkle, refusing to cast another light until someone broke the moment. Marcus placed his phone down carefully, too carefully, like one wrong move might shatter the room's fragile stillness. His eyes darted between the faces around the table, searching for a lifeline, but finding none. Dad leaned forward, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. Marcus, what was that about? Marcus swallowed his throat, working visibly, his jaw tightening as though he might grind his teeth to dust. He hesitated, eyes flicking to me again. He said Emily's in Forbes. Forbes' youngest billionaire. The words cracked through the room like a thunderclap. Gasps, sharp audible intakes of breath. My uncle dropped his fork with a clatter, the metal ringing against fine china. Mom's hand shook as her wineglass hovered halfway between the table and her lips. Heather blinked rapidly, her perfectly rehearsed smirk slipping into nothing but disbelief. Even Sarah, who had joined the chorus of mockery earlier, sat with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open as though she had forgotten how to breathe. I didn't flinch. I didn't rush to explain or confirm. Instead, I swirled the golden liquid in my glass, letting it catch the light from the candles. Calm. Silent. Composed. Marcus's breath came uneven now, ragged, his face pale. His hands gripped the edge of the table. He turned to me at last, voice raw. Emily, is this true? Every eye at that table snapped to me at once. Their stares burned not with mockery anymore, but with something else. A cocktail of awe, fear, and shame. I let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it, squirm in it. Let the weight of every cruel word they'd said just moments before press against their chests like iron. Then I looked up, meeting Marcus's desperate gaze. Slowly, deliberately, I lifted my glass. And I smiled. I didn't speak a single word. I didn't need to. The message was clear enough. The room that had roared with laughter at my expense only minutes before now drowned in their own stunned silence. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The silence stretched like glass about to shatter. Forks lay abandoned on plates, the turkey sat untouched, and every pair of eyes pressed into me. They waited, hungry for me to stumble, desperate for me to deny it, to say Forbes had made a mistake. I let the silence swell heavier, thicker, until it settled like smoke in their throats. I gave them nothing. Then came the sound. A polished shuffle of shoes across the parquet floor, cutting through the stillness like a knife. A waiter in a black suit stopped at my side. His presence was ordinary, but his words were not. Welcome back, Ms. Carter. He said, his tone calm but deliberate. Your usual arrangement. The words dropped like a stone into water. Ripples of shock coursed through the table. My father blinked rapidly as though trying to rouse himself from a dream. My mother's hand shot to her pearls, twisting them until the string strained against her throat. Marcus's jaw slackened, his color draining to ash. Heather froze mid-smirk, the lipstick at the corners of her mouth cracking as if even her mask couldn't withstand the moment. I tilted my head slightly, unhurried. Yes, I said, my voice even. Bring it out. The waiter bowed and walked away, his steps deliberate, certain. Behind him, confusion thickened like fog. "Your usual arrangement?" My mother whispered, her voice thin, breakable, as if one wrong word might splinter her entirely. I set my glass down gently and folded my napkin with care, every motion deliberate. "Yes, I come here often. The staff know me." My father leaned forward, red blotches rising up his neck. His voice cracked like a whip. "Emily, what is this? Some performance?" Before I could answer, the lights dimmed. The soft carols that had been playing faded into silence. Screens hidden along the paneled walls flickered on one after another, bathing the dining room in a cold electric glow. Gasps shot around the table. And then they saw it. My name stretched bold across the screens. Forbes, Emily Carter, youngest billionaire after groundbreaking IPO. A photograph filled the space, me at a podium, cameras flashing, the glass tower of my company rising behind me. Not the Emily they thought they knew. Not the cousin in thrifted jeans, not the daughter with peeling apartment walls and a wheezing car. This was someone they didn't recognize yet couldn't deny. The dining room suddenly felt smaller, as though the walls themselves were pushing inward. Heather's chair screeched against the floor as she stumbled backward. No, this isn't real. You're broke. You drive that car?" I turned my gaze on her, calm, almost pitying. "Appearances can be useful, Heather." My father's hand slammed against the table, rattling the crystal. "If this is true, why hide it? Why let your own family believe you were failing?" I cut in, my tone sharp enough to slice through him. "Because that's what you wanted to believe. It was easier for you to make me fail than admit you'd been wrong about me." Another screen lit, then another. Images poured across the walls. Me shaking hands with investors, cutting ribbons at new offices, delivering keynotes at conferences they'd never cared to ask about. Headlines scrolled like a ticker: acquisitions, expansions, global partnerships. Years of my life, years. They had dismissed, ignored, mocked, illuminated around them, undeniable, inescapable. My mother's wine glass trembled in her hand, red liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Emily," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why didn't you tell us?" I locked eyes with her, unblinking. "Would you have listened? Or would you have laughed like the night I told you I wanted to build something new?" Marcus shifted uneasily in his chair. The gleam of his cufflinks dulled his composure, unraveling. His voice was barely audible. You let us think you were nothing." I leaned forward, my words slow and deliberate. "No, Marcus, I didn't let you think anything. You chose the story you liked best, the one where you shone brightest, and I stayed small. That choice was yours." The weight of my words pressed down on the room, heavier than any headline. The silence no longer buzzed with disbelief. It throbbed with shame. And then the waiter returned, carrying a single bottle cradled with reverence. The label caught the chandelier's glow, golden letters shimmering. My father's breath hitched, recognition dawning. He knew what it was. He had spent years boasting about bottles like this one's he could never even touch. "Compliments of Ms. Carter," the waiter announced. With a careful twist, the cork popped free. He poured into each crystal flute with unhurried precision, the fizz catching the light like liquid fire. No one moved at first. Their hands hovered hesitant, as though unsure if they were worthy to touch what had been set before them. I lifted mine first. Calm, steady. My gaze swept the table one by one. My father, fists tight around the silverware, anger masking fear. My mother, eyes shining with tears she didn't want to shed. Marcus, pale and small, stripped of his bravado. Heather, lips parted, the smirk gone, her silence louder than any insult. For 15 years, I said, my voice carrying into every corner of the stunned dining room, you called me the family failure. Tonight you finally see the truth. And I drank. The others followed reluctantly, their hands trembling as they raised their flutes. They swallowed champagne that burned not because of bubbles, but because it tasted like regret. This wasn't Christmas dinner anymore. This was reckoning. The chandelier sparkled above us. The screens glowed, and for once in my life the table was mine. The first sound came from my mother. A thin gasp, then the faint clatter of pearls twisting too tight around her throat. They left faint red marks on her pale skin. Her eyes darted to mine, shimmering with something that wanted to be pride but sagged under years of habit. "Emily, darling," she said softly. The words were brittle, rehearsed like she'd practiced them in a mirror, but never spoken them with conviction. "We're proud of you. Proud." The word felt foreign in her mouth, like she had borrowed it from a stranger, hoping it would fit for the moment. My father was next. He straightened in his chair, puffing his chest, his old tricks of posture and authority sliding back into place like armor. His voice carried that calm edge he used in boardrooms when he was about to bulldoze someone. "Impressive," he said. "Truly impressive. Perhaps this is an opportunity for us to collaborate. Family ventures. Investments. We could build something together." I didn't even need to speak. I only raised my hand. That simple motion, slow deliberate, was enough to silence him. "You want it now?" I asked, my voice cold as steel. After years of refusing to put a single dollar into my ideas, the words cracked against the polished table, sharper than broken crystal. Marcus leaned forward. His cufflinks no longer gleamed with triumph, they glistened with nervous sweat. His voice carried not curiosity, not concern, but accusation. "Why didn't you tell us? You let us think you were barely surviving. You let Mom worry." I locked eyes with him. Calm, steady. "No, Marcus. I didn't let you think anything. You chose the story you liked best." The hit landed. I saw it in the tightening of his jaw and the twitch of his lips, as if words were fighting to break free. But none came. My mother forced out a shaky laugh too high-pitched to sound natural. "Families fight," she said, grasping at the air like someone groping in the dark. "That's what families do. But at the end of the day, blood is blood. Don't you think it's time to move forward? You've proven yourself now." I leaned back slightly, the chandelier's glow shimmering in my glass. My voice sharpened, slicing each syllable clean. "Prove myself, I didn't need to prove anything. What I needed was respect, even when you thought I had nothing to give." The chandelier above swayed slightly, its crystals catching the golden light, scattering it across the table. The silence deepened. It wasn't the stunned disbelief of earlier. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air had turned to cement. And then from the far end of the table, a new voice slithered into the quiet. Uncle David. He leaned back lazily, swirling the last inch of whiskey in his glass. His grin was slick, opportunistic, the kind of smile that only ever appeared when there was something to take. "Emily," he drawled, "if all this is true, and clearly it is, maybe you'd consider letting me buy a stake in your company. Keep it in the family, you know." I almost laughed. The sound rose in my chest, but came out as something colder. "Keep it in the family," I said. "The same family that laughed at me out of rooms. The same one that called me a burden, and embarrassment left me sleeping on a mattress on the floor. That family." David shrugged, unbothered. His casual arrogance was almost insulting. "Business is business. Don't take it personally." That was when I pushed my chair back. The scrape of polished wood against marble rang sharp, startling, making every head at the table flinch. I rose, the champagne flute still in my hand. For the first time all evening, every eye was on me, without a smirk, without a whisper. "Let me make something clear." My voice cut through the heavy air like a blade. "I built this empire without you. I asked for support once you mocked me. I asked for respect, you dismissed me. Now you want a seat at my table?" I let my gaze sweep across them slowly, deliberately. Marcus pale, his once perfect confidence draining from his face. Mom blinking rapidly as though she could blink herself into another reality. Dad, fists clenched around silverware, his old authority slipping through his fingers like sand. Heather motionless, her lips parted but no sound came. "I don't owe you partnership," I continued. "I don't owe you forgiveness. And I certainly don't owe you the comfort of pretending you always believed in me. Emily." Dad tried again, his voice harsher, desperate to reclaim something, anything. I didn't let him finish. "You talk about family, but family isn't supposed to cheer only when you win. They're supposed to stand beside you when you lose. Not one of you did. The chandelier's light glinted in my glass as I raised it slightly higher. The champagne fizz rose and popped, each bubble echoing like sparks in the tense silence. What followed wasn't disbelief anymore. It was something heavier. Shame. It pooled in the corners of the room, crawled up their spines, pressed down on their shoulders until they all seemed smaller. I took a slow sip, savoring it, letting them watch, letting them taste their own silence. Tonight isn't about your sudden pride. It isn't about deals or investments. Tonight is about the truth. I set my glass down with deliberate care, the sound echoing like a gavel strike. And the truth is, I don't need you. Not anymore. The words didn't echo. They sank. Heavy stones dropping deep into water, leaving only ripples of silence behind. Marcus looked as though he might break apart, words tangled and choking him. Heather avoided my eyes, her hands stiff in her lap. My parents, who once towered over me with judgment, now looked small, shrinking into shadows of the roles they had written for me. I leaned back, letting the tension breathe, letting it settle just a little deeper into their bones. Then I added, almost casually, "And tomorrow the rest of the world will know too." No one moved. Not even the chandeliers dared sway. The air itself felt fragile, as though one breath might shatter it. The same family that had once thrived on mocking me now sat shackled by silence, caught between disbelief and the dread of tomorrow. For the first time at that table, I wasn't an outsider. I was the only one in control. I didn't wait for another excuse, another plea, another attempt to rewrite history. The scrape of my chair against the marble floor was sharp, final, like a gavel striking down in court, and then I walked away. Behind me, the clinking of glasses, the shuffle of shoes, the frantic clearing of throats all blurred into nothing. The family that once relished watching me squirm now sat in silence, their power dissolving into thin air. The hallway outside the banquet room stretched long and quiet, lined with gilded mirrors and candles flickering against polished walls. My heels echoed with every step, steady, certain each click pulling me further from the noise. For the first time that night I could breathe. The air felt cooler, freer, as if even the building itself knew a verdict had been reached. A waiter appeared, the same one who had whispered to me earlier. His movements were careful, almost reverent. He paused, bowed slightly, and said softly, "We're honored to have you here, Ms. Carter." Truly, that single moment of respect from a stranger carried more weight than every hollow compliment my family had scrambled to throw at me tonight. His words weren't dipped in guilt or bargaining. They were simple, honest, and they landed deeper than I expected. I thanked him with a nod, then walked further down the hall. My heels tapped softly like punctuation marks in the silence. From behind the doors, muffled voices followed me. My father's sharp tone, my mother's high-pitched whisper, Marcus cutting in, Heather muttering. Even now they were trying to salvage pride to bend the narrative in their favor. For a second, guilt tugged at me. Family is family, isn't it? That's what they always said. But then I remembered their version of family only worked when I stayed small, when I lowered my head, when I played the role of failure so Marcus could shine brighter. And I was done playing small. I pushed open the doors and stepped outside into the December night. The cold hit me instantly, crisp and bracing, the kind of cold that wakes every nerve in your body. The city stretched before me, lights blazing against the dark sky, 1,000 silent witnesses to the life I had built. My breath frosted in the air, but inside I burned steady, not with anger anymore, not even with vindication, with clarity. Voiceover. The sweetest revenge isn't shouting. It isn't throwing their words back in their faces. The sweetest revenge is being undeniable. So undeniable that even your silence is louder than their mockery. I paused at the edge of the steps, the banquet hall glowing behind me. From inside came muffled bursts of argument, my father's frustration, Marcus scrambling to reassert himself. Heather's disbelief, my mother's nervous laugh. They were unraveling without me even being in the room, and I knew I didn't need to walk back in there. They already knew. The balance had shifted forever. My driver stood waiting by the sleek black car parked at the curb. He pulled open the door with a respectful nod. The warmth from inside spilled out, but I lingered on the sidewalk a moment longer, the cold wrapping around me like armor. I glanced back at the glowing windows of the hall. Behind them, my family could twist the story however they liked. They could whisper excuses, point fingers, rewrite history. But none of it mattered anymore. The truth wasn't in that room. The truth was out here with me, in the empire I had built. In the contract signed, the IPO celebrated the headlines already circling the globe. In every sleepless night, I had turned into something solid, undeniable mine. I slid into the back seat, the leather soft beneath me. The driver shut the door and the sound was quiet but final, like sealing the past behind me. The car pulled forward, headlights slicing through the night. Streets blurred past holiday lights, strung across avenues, shop windows dressed in glittering displays, strangers bundled in scarves, their laughter fogging in the air. Life moved forward, and so did I. For the first time in years, I smiled. Not the careful, measured smile I used at family dinners. Not the sharp smile of survival. A real one. Unburdened. Steady. Rachel's voice came back to me, my cousin, the only one who had whispered the truth at that table once. "Don't let them get to you. They'll regret it one day." She was right. They regretted it now, sitting in that banquet hall, scrambling for words they should have spoken years ago. And as the city opened wide ahead of me, endless and alive, I knew this was only the beginning. Voiceover. So let me ask you, if your family doubted you, dismissed you, mocked you, what would you do when you finally rose? Would you forgive them? Would you let them rewrite the story they once used against you? Or would you let your success speak louder than their laughter? The car turned onto a wide boulevard, neon signs reflecting off the windows, the hum of the city filling the silence. I leaned back against the seat, letting the rhythm of the road steady me. The banquet hall was behind me. The reckoning was behind me. What stretched ahead was mine alone to claim, because no matter what came next, the truth was already written, and this time it was written by me.